How's it going, guys? Awesome Mayo here, and today we're going to talk about how you as a real estate investor can go out and hire a real estate agent, a realtor that will make you $10,000 a month, month after month with regularity and predictability. This requires zero cash, so you need absolutely no money to get started. You can do this with no experience, and you can get started as soon as you're done watching this here today. And when I say hire an agent, the money that you're going to pay them is going to come out of the money that they pay you, the money that they make you. So you need no cash out of pocket, and eventually as you get better at each of these deals and you start putting more and more together, they'll run on their own. Each little individual unit will run on its own, self-similarity. Remember that from the science class? They'll run on their own with no involvement from you. So your agent will go out and make you $10,000 a month automatically. It's pretty cool stuff. And we've had a bunch of students around the world that have done this. And I'll even show you later on how one agent used this technique to go from being ranked in only like the top 10,000 agents in the world to one of the top 5 agents in all of Italy. So we've got Italia in the house. That's pretty cool. I'm also going to show you how a young lady used today's class to start making $22,000 a month, and it took less than 15 minutes a week. Plus, we're going to talk about one of our favorite peoples. How does a guy go from being broke, newly divorced, and so strapped for cash that he was actually hunting squirrels and cooking them, so he was actually eating squirrels to save money? And by the way, you guys know this, I'm an animal lover. Iago and Zazu have changed my life and made me, I'm actually almost always vegan, but I'm always vegetarian. I eat no meat at all. And I was a guy, I used to eat 2-3 Whoppers for breakfast. So my entire lifestyle has changed, but that's a whole nother story. My point is that I am not into hurting animals of any kind. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm an animal lover, but I'm also not judging either. And if you're eating any kind of meat, as most people do, any kind of meat or dairy, somebody's hunting and killing, whether it's you or not. The point is that this guy, he's just a great guy. He's a wonderful student, a wonderful example, and it's just amazing to consider his fall from grace, where it got so bad, it got to a point where he was actually having to hunt his own yard. He was having to get food from his own yard. That's where he was at, hunting his own food from his front and backyard. That's how bad things had gotten. But then, with no money, no credit, and a nearly empty stomach, he went out and started stacking all kinds of G's. He went from zero to over $10,000 a month almost overnight. He pulled in over $6,000 in his first 4 days, and you're going to see exactly how he did it. So this is a pretty cool process that the nuts on our team have invented, and I think you guys are really going to like it. This is how a real estate investor can hire a realtor that makes you $10,000 a month every month, starting from zero with no money, no credit, and even if you're eating squirrels. Okay, so let's get started. There's so many ways to do this, to make money with agents, and so many ways to hire them and reverse hire them, I should say. Remember, reverse hiring is where you build your team by hiring people, but instead of paying them, they pay you. It's a pretty cool process. And there's so many ways to reverse hire agents and to make them and have them make you $10,000 a month and make them a bunch of money as well. But here today, you and I are going to talk about just one way. So here's a quick overview of what you're going to do. You're going to do lease option deals. These are the same as a rent to buy deal. If you aren't familiar with these, you can go through the other class where I cover this in depth. There's a class titled, I think, How to Make $10,000 a month in cash flow by doing one deal a month or something like that. And in that class, I go over lease options and how to put them together, and I go over it in great detail. So if you're not familiar with this, you can go through that class. So what you're going to do here is really simple. You are going to have real estate agents find you lease option deals, and then you're going to hire an agent, and you can even use the very same agent that just brought you the deal. You don't have to, but you can use the same agent that just brought you the deal and hire them to go ahead and sell that lease option for you. It's that simple. Now, I know I can hear the moaning of the LCs already, but awesome, lease options don't work in my area. Realtors hate lease options. And aren't lease options illegal anyway? And I've covered all these issues in other classes, but to these people, the LCs, it doesn't matter how often we cover it, how many times we go over it. Sometimes people get so thick-headed. They're so excited to embrace any excuse or anything that makes them feel better about not doing anything. They'll search high and low and desperately look for a way to invalidate all the success stories that we've had, all of the students that have gone out and made all kinds of shizzle happen. They'll find a way to ignore that. All the people that have done these deals and are doing these deals every single day in every single market imaginable all over the world, sellers markets, buyers markets, flatline markets. It doesn't matter. They'll find a way to be a stick in the mud, even if it means they have to chop down a tree. Pay no mind to the LC. You give them an inch and they think they're a ruler. I don't make these classes for them. I make them for the rest of you guys. You take my stuff and you bring just some enthusiasm, some passion, and just a little bit of desire, just some old-fashioned willpower. Bring that to the party and combine that with the training here, and you can open doors that are invisible to others. So So there are 3 basic steps in doing this. Step 1, we train our agent to find us deals. Step 2, we train our agent to sell our deals. And step 3, subtractive iteration. This is always the last step, right? Because once you're making $10,000 a month with an agent and that business is running on its own, like its own little oil well, you want to move on to the next one and repeat with more iterations. Any student of my stuff knows that once we complete one iteration, what do? What do we always do? What is it, Randall? He's already looking away, I know. Because after one pass, after one iteration, what do? We do the same thing a hungry clock does. We go back 4 seconds, right? Of course, everyone knows that. Iterations, that's where it's at. But you also want to train your agent to go out and train an agent. That's the point of no return. Remember, Skynet takes over the world and destroys humanity, not with the robots that humans built, but with the robots that they built. Robots building robots. The sooner you get to that point in your business, the happier you'll be, the more money you'll make, and the more you'll have to thank me for. And that's really what your life is all about, right? Being in love with me. And you know, I have already done all the hard work for you guys. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel to have a revolution. So first, let's look at the $10,000 a month business. How can we engineer that exact income? Well, with a lease option deal, or really any real estate deal, really any business in general, when it comes to money, there are 3 kinds of money. Money now, money over time, and money later. So when you do a lease option, for example, let's say it's a $100,000 house and the seller owes $100,000 or close to it. So they have no equity. In this case, this may be a good candidate for a lease option. So you can control the property. Remember, as John Rockefeller said, ownership is nothing, control is everything. So you control the property, totally zero down with no money into the deal, and then you find a lease option tenant and you get a down payment. Normally the down payment's going to be at least $3,000 to $5,000 down. Doesn't matter if it's a $100,000 property or not, we just adjust the down payment. So the numbers here don't matter, it's the concept. So the minimum of $3,000 to $5,000 down. And when you structure these deals, you usually want at least $200 to $300 a month in cash flow, and at least about $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000 on the back end when the buyer refinances. So for example, let's say the mortgage payment is $800 and you sell the house for $110,000, and you could sell it for $110 even though it's only worth $100, because whenever you sell on terms, you can sell for a higher price. So the buyer is going to pay, let's say, $5,000 down, and they agree to purchase the house in 1 to 3 years for $110,000. And in the meantime, they're going to pay $1,000 or $1,100 a month. In that case, you're making money all 3 ways, right? You get the money right now. You get the money now, the $5,000. You get money over time, the $200 to $300 a month. That's over the $800 a month that's on the seller's mortgage. And then when they refinance the house with a new loan and the buyer uses their credit and they get the home in their name, an actual like official traditional purchase, at that time you're going to get $10,000 because it's $110,000 minus the $100,000 or whatever the loan amount is. So that's money now, money over time, and money later. But for right now, just to be conservative, we're not even going to consider any of that money over time and money later. We're just going to talk about the money right now, that $3,000 to $5,000 in the down payment. And we're not even going to consider the $5,000. Let's just say it's $3,000 to $4,000, which it should never be less than that, by the way. But even if we look at just $3,000 to $4,000 down, that means that we need about 3 deals a month to make $10,000 a month. So when we work with our agent, we need to make sure that that agent is bringing us and closing at least 3 deals a month. 3 deals a month. That's the magic number. That's it. And it's not so bad when you look at it this way, right? It seems pretty easy. And just like anything else, it is easy if you have the right attitude and training. And to reach this goal, just like any business goal with any business, really, you're either trained and you know what you're doing or you're just guessing. So 3 deals equals 10 grand a month. That's our goal. Now remember, the way that we create income immunity is to stack policies. We want to have multiple ways to reach our goal. So think of it this way. You're here and your goal of $10,000 a month or 3 deals a month is over here. And the $10,000, by the way, is just the minimum amount. You know, we want to grow 10 to 30 grand a month and go well beyond that, but it's a good place to start, 10 grand a month. And this exercise, by the way, of adding a minimum allowable goal to or a minimum allowable amount to your goals is a good exercise, because now you know you're going to at least hit 10 grand a month. So now to get to this goal, we want to build a bridge to get over there, but it's not a cool modern bridge. It's like an old rickety Indiana Jones bridge. And each way that you have to get across, each way you have to get to your goal is like a rope that makes the bridge stronger. You get what I'm saying? So you want as many ropes as possible. So again, each way we have to get to that 10 grand a month, the better off we are. You want to create as many avenues to this goal as possible. The more ways we have of hitting a financial target, the better the income is. The more ways you have of reaching a goal, the more predictable and insulated your journey to that goal will be. And that's a huge thing. Predictability. So many people in real estate have no idea what's coming. They have no idea how much money, if any, they'll make tomorrow, next week, next month. It's why so many of them go out of business. Creating predictability is a skill. Your income, your business, and the way you grow it. You want your income, you want your money to be as controllable and predictable as your shadow. As any of my students will tell you, and they're actually probably sick of me saying this, but it's so true. Anything that is predictable is controllable, and anything controllable is scalable. So in this case, we're working with and using a real estate agent. And the question here, the issue here is, how do we get them, or how do we start doing 3 deals a month with them? And we want to have multiple ways of doing that. Now, there are so many ways to do this, and so many ways ways to work with agents, so many ways we've covered in other classes, but so many ways of hitting that 10 to 30 grand a month, and so many ways to hire and train your agents to bring you that money every month. So when you consider all the different options we have, there are so many ways to find deals and to train our agents to find deals. If we look at each of these as a pillar, right, or as ropes on that bridge that make it stronger, we have so many different options. We could use eviction notices. We could use absentee owners with equity, condemned properties, fire damage properties, houses with code violations, fire marshal properties, recently reduced houses, handyman specials, rehabs. We can search the MLS specifically for motivated or must sell keywords in the description, or even just lease option properties right there in the MLS. Although sometimes agents don't put that there. We can put possible rental in our search criteria for the MLS. The list goes on. I mean, there's just 1,000 ways to do this. There's a whole bunch of ways to find deals. And it's not just for lease options, but we can use those same methods and a whole lot more that we go over in all sorts of other places. I've talked about this so much, but there's so many ways to find these deals. There's all kinds of ways to find all kinds of fast cash deals, whether they're cash offers, terms offers, rehab assignments. And I've gone over this stuff in other classes. The point is that when we set a goal, a target income, and then we support the bridge to that goal with a reinforced checklist. Remember, you can grow any business in the world and reach any income with the right flowchart, checklist, and script. Those are our three main drivers of everything. Checklists are really important in creating uniform execution among you and your team and creating those predictable results. So we have all kinds of ways to train our team, in this case agents, to find us those deals. But today, you and I are going to ignore all of that stuff. You'd make a lot more than 10 to 30 grand if you put even half or even a quarter of that in place. But today, we're going to skip all of that. We're going to ignore all that, and we're going to go with three very, very simple ways. Three simple ways that any hungry agent can go out and do and consistently make you 10 to 30 grand a month and make themselves a lot of money in that process too. And when it comes to that checklist, by the way, you want to make sure that you don't just take notes, but you actually create a checklist the way that I teach, because otherwise you don't do anything with what you wrote down. You might as well make a belt out of cardboard because it's a waste of paper. Come on, Randall, give me something. Oh my God, I got to smile. I'll have to remember that. Waste of paper, that word. Now remember, with any kind of checklist or marketing like this, anytime you build a bridge, you want to do three things. First, you execute. Second, you subtract. And third, you track and improve. So first you do it, then you get it done. So it gets done without you, and then you improve it. And the only way you ever improve anything is by measuring. Otherwise, you don't know if you improve. So once you get these three items in place with your agent, you get it done subtractively, where you are totally subtracted from the process, and then you're just going to work with your agent to improve the results. So here's what your agent is going to do. We only need 3 deals a month. That's our minimum goal, right? That's our goal we've been talking about, and then we're building our bridge to get there. So to find these deals, your agent's basically going to use 3 very, very simple sources. None of the stuff we talked about earlier. 3 even simpler sources. Number 1, from their own listings. Number 2, from expired listings within their office. And number 3, dead inventory or nearly expired listings. And that's it. It's that simple. Remember, it's never what you do, it's how you do it. So for the rest of this class, we're going to talk about how to do this like an artist, like a badass, and how to make sure that everybody wins. But first, I should say the relationship, before we get into this, the relationship between agents and investors can sometimes be like cats and dogs. Talking to an agent can be as charming as a fist to the throat. And that's the same way that a lot of investors are. But again, that's because of it's always the way that you do it. Not what you do, but it's the way you do it. So when you do this correctly and you do what's in everybody's best interest, you keep that in mind, compliance will become natural, even inevitable. So out of the 3 ways to find our deals, our agent, let's talk about the first way first. We're going to go over each of these in depth. Let's talk about number 1 first. Number 1 is the agent can find lease option deals from their current business, their own listings. So here's how this works. From now on, and remember, those are magic words. From now on, whenever you start a sentence with those words, you're about to make rules for your business. You're about to work on your business and not in your business. Start using those words all the time from now on. They're powerful words, y'all. Okay, so from now on, your agent, whenever they talk to any seller, whether they list that house, that seller or not, they're going to explain. They're going to tell the seller, I have a friend that I work with who's a specialist in selling houses creatively. Now, this isn't going to be a hard sale or anything. They're just going to mention you as a friend that they have. And this is an endorsed introduction that you may recognize from our compliance language in our compliance class, because it's just an endorsed introduction. And then they're going to say that there are ways to sell your house that may or may not make sense for that seller depending on their situation. And now let's say that the agent is listing that property. They can say, well, we'll try it this way first, but just so you know about your other options, I'll get you in touch with a friend of mine who's an expert on these other types of selling methods. And the agent is doing this so that the seller knows beforehand what other steps can be taken so they have time to get used to the idea. And if they have any sticker shock, you give it time and education to go away. So that's from the listings that the agent is actively doing. And it also helps them with their sellers to seem like they're doing stuff when maybe they're not doing such a great job with their sellers. So if the house isn't selling, they are still learning about this other process that they can work with you on. So that's with their current listings. Now, what about for the houses where the agent meets with the seller and the conclusion they come to is that the person can't afford to sell their house with an agent? Well, it's the same thing, right? The agent says, this looks like it doesn't make sense to list, but I have a friend of mine who specializes specializes in this. You see what happens? Now, there are other types of business aside from the houses they do list and the houses they don't list that the agent can do this with. We'll look at just one more, and that is any hard to sell or expired listings of their own. They could say, you know, we tried listing this a few months ago and there were changes in the market or whatever, and I have a friend of mine who works with hard to sell or impossible to sell houses, and there are a few processes that might help you if you want to know more, and then bam, you're introduced to them as well. So the agent can monetize that inventory that they personally have that's not selling or has gone expired in the past. So you take a look at those three ways just from the agent themselves. First, they have the houses that they do list, they have the houses that they don't list, and then they have the hard to sell listings that they have. So basically, we have three sources of seller right there, right from the agent's current business, right? Now, what happens when they start sending people over to you? What's the exact process they go through? We're going to get into that later. But first, let's go over the other two ways that your agent's going to find deals. So that was number one, their own listings, their own business. Number two is expired listings from other agents in their office. So whenever a seller lists a house for sale with an agent, they usually do it for 6 months. And at the end of that time, if the house doesn't sell, the listing becomes expired. So the seller wanted to sell their house. They tried to sell their house. They were even willing to hire a professional to do it, but they did not sell their house. So now they're stuck with a house that they don't want. They want to sell. They still want to sell. Now, there are different ways to target expireds. You can target expireds from a specific agent or a specific group of agents or from a large area. Right now, we're only going to talk about targeting expireds from this agent's office. Now, it may be that we group a few offices together so that we can hit our target numbers. You can also target agents that work for a broker that matches certain criteria with how many agents they have at that brokerage. But we just want to make sure we're working with an agent that we get a consistent inventory from. Now, here's some interesting numbers to know. Across the board, generally about 30% of all listings will go expired. That's about 1 out of 3 houses that are listed for sale with a real estate agent will not sell. They'll become expired listings. This doesn't matter how hot or slow the market is. It's across the board over the years. There's all kinds of research, and the research is really clear on this. Over several years, decades, it's very clear about this. About 30 to 40%. It's about 25 to 35%. So let's say your agent works at a broker with 100 agents, or let's just say 50 agents. Now, there are brokers out there with hundreds of agents, so 100 isn't hard to find, but we'll just go with 50 just to be safe. Let's say they have 50 agents there, and let's say those 50 agents, they list on average, let's say 2 properties a month. That's 100 properties a month total from those 50 agents. That means that on average, they have 30 listings a month that are expiring. Now, even if you only work with just 10% of those listings, that's 3 houses right there, or 3 deals a month. Remember, that's our goal. So this method alone, this second little process here of working with and targeting expired listings of other agents in that office, this alone can get you to the 10 grand a month. So how do we get in touch with these sellers? One way to go about this is to have the receptionist or somebody that the seller recognizes to call that seller and explain the same thing that your agent does to their own sellers. They could say, "Hi, this is Jack from Remax." Remember, the seller already has a relationship with the agent and the broker that the house is listed through, so they aren't strangers when they call. So they call and say, "Hi, I saw your home is expired. Just want to let you know that we have a friend here who works and specializes in selling hard to sell homes with creative financing." And you see what happens. You see what we're doing here. The same thing, right? An endorsed introduction. It might be able to help you. And then the seller will learn more because they'll get a series of emails from you that explain everything, which I'll go over in a second. But first, let's talk about number 3. So number 1 was working with the agent's own business. Number 2 was working with expireds from other agents in their office. And remember, any one of these is more than enough to hit our 10 grand a month. And now number 3 is dead listings or dead inventory, hard to sell listings, nearly expired listings. These are going to come from the agents themselves as their own listings, or from the agent that you're working with, either their own listings or from other listings of other agents in their office. So this is, like a huge secret, and almost nobody does this, and you can make all kinds of bank on these deals, and it's so simple. So here's how this works. Remember how a listing expires after 6 months because usually the contract that the agent signed with the seller is for 6 months. Well, in the MLS, and in this, that's a network that the agents list properties on, if you're not sure about that, or if you hadn't heard about it, the multiple listing service MLS. Well, on every property, there's a property sheet for every property that gets put up on the MLS. This is where all the details of the house are, the description, the bedrooms, the bath, the listing price, square feet, all that stuff. Well, in the bottom right of that page are the letters DOM, and that's for days on market. There's also a note for when the listing expires and when the listing started. So you know exactly when they listed the property and how long it's been on the market and how long it has left. Usually it's going to be 6 months, but it might be a different date. So when you're targeting dead listings, you target homes that have been on the market for almost 6 months, let's say 180 days, a little bit less than that, or that are set to expire in the next 7 days, the next 10 days, the next 2 weeks, the next month, whatever number you need. You adjust the criteria as you go in order to get the amount of deals that you need. Now, these are houses whose listing contract is about to expire. The listing realtor and the seller are usually desperate to get some kind of offer, some kind of action on this house, especially the agent, so they can save face in front of the seller. Now, sometimes these efforts may overlap because you're getting in touch with nearly expireds, and then later you're getting in touch with people who actually expired, but that's okay, and you'll see why when we go over what happens when they're sent over to you. But in this case, you can take the same approach with these sellers as with expired listings. For example, a receptionist or an assistant gives them a quick call and says, "Hi, this is Jenny from the realty company, and I know you have had your house listed, and it looks like there have been no offers on it, and it's going to expire soon. We just want to let you know that there's another possible way to sell your house. A friend of ours who's also an expert in creative ways to sell houses in tough markets, da-da-da-da-da." You see where we're going? That's how the introduction is done. It's important to note that when you do this, you're leveraging the relationship that the agent and that the broker have with the seller. This means you have immediate positioning, because the goal of that conversation is to prime them to frame what they're going to get from you properly so that they go through it. So now if we take a step back and we look at these three sources of deals, the ways that your pipeline is being fed. First, we have the agent using their own business. These are their current and future listings and houses that don't get listed. Second, we have expired listings from other agents in the office. And third, we have dead inventory or nearly expired houses. So people are being introduced to you from these three sources. So the next question is, what happens when people are sent to you, right? That's an important question. So here is where the shizzle gets real. Hopefully you've gone through my Mind Control and Propaganda for Real Estate Investors class, but in case you haven't, or even if you have, here's a quick refresher. This is the compliance curve. It's like a big arch, like the St. Louis Arch. And this is a map of how the human mind reacts to new ideas. At first, there's resistance, and then progression, and eventually acceptance. This is how the mind in general responds to new ideas. It's a very predictable response. And remember, if it's predictable, it's controllable. This is something that media manipulators and propagandists have known for centuries. I learned this extensively when I worked for the government. This is what is done to change people's attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors over time. What I'm saying is that understanding this concept is an important thing to learn if you want to build your skill at gaining compliance with people. What I'm saying is that understanding this concept is an important thing to learn if you want to build your skill at gaining compliance with people. Think of it this way. If we imagine that we divide this curve into two parts. We split it right down the middle, so we have two symmetrical parts. Now on the left-hand side, here is where the resistance is. It's where it grows. It's at its strongest. This is not where you want to be talking to people. This is all uphill. And we all know what that feels like, right? So in real estate, like as a real estate investor, this is where you hear things like, "How long have you been doing this? Who are you again? How'd you get my number? Is this a scam? That sounds illegal. Let me check with my wife. Stop calling me. Take me off your list," right? We've all been there, right? It's all uphill. This is where you get all kinds of resistance. You know, it's like playing tennis with bowling balls. This is where we get into the dangerous territory of the evil D word. You start to second guess yourself, your skill. You lost what little confidence you had starting something new, and eventually you get discouraged. Now, the secret to getting through this is to realize what's happening and that it isn't personal against you, and that it's just the normal way that people respond to new ideas. So when you spend time here, you do it on purpose to build your skill, to research, to gather intel. You're doing it on purpose is the point. But the second thing to realize, the big secret here, is that once you get going and you know what you're doing, you don't want to spend any time on the left side. The more time that you spend on the left side, the more you do that, the more you'll convince yourself that you can't do this, that this won't work for you, that this won't work in your area or for you or in your business. You'll let the LC take over and everything goes in the toilet. This is what so many people in real estate do wrong. They find themselves spending time here on the left side where conversations are as fun as installing a barbed wire catheter. Not good. Remember, you want to be dancing your way through this. People should look at you and think you're in Cuba because it's so obvious that you're having a good time. Randall, don't judge me. The thing is that you really want to spend your time on the right side, over here after gravity has taken over. And really you want to spend your time at the very tail end. This is when people have filtered and screened and pre-qualified themselves. So you and your team should only spend time with people on the right side of the curve. So whenever you think of the compliance curve and your time being spent, it should always be on the right side after the heavy lifting has already been done for you. And the stuff that does the heavy lifting for you are compliance assets. You want the heavy lifting done for you. Now, in order to do that, there are three simple phases to go through. So look at the whole curve here. On the left-hand side, we have the introduction. This has to be good. Remember that the single biggest expense your company will ever have, that you'll ever go through, especially when it comes to marketing or growing your business, the biggest, most expensive thing is when you turn a stranger into not a stranger. So the moment you meet somebody new, or you talk to somebody new, or a new visitor comes to your website, those actions are the most expensive. And that's why it's so important that you handle that well, and that you have a process that takes them from a stranger to not a stranger, and then into a client, and ultimately a raving fan of yours. So here at the left, we have the introduction. And then on the very right over here, we have completion. And that basically means in our case that you have a completed transaction. They become a client and you do business with them. Now in between, we have the process of indoctrination. So you need to have a process that takes people through their objections, through their resistance, through their fear and hesitations. And this process does a majority of the work automatically. And eventually it does all the work. Now I do recommend that you look at this through the lens of propaganda, compliance, and indoctrination, because those principles, these are the very very same principles that are used on us every day. There is a pattern. People are predictable. And when you understand what buttons to hit, what levers to pull, and what switches to turn on, you will have reliable, scalable means of influencing and gaining compliance. And this isn't getting people to do what you want. It's helping people do what you want because it's what they want for their own reasons. This is how governments and PR people look at a voting public or any group of people. This is the exact model that's been around for hundreds of years. It's very reliable. And like I said, I learned just how reliable it is when I've seen, on my time on the other side working for the government. But you can use the same process to do things for good. You can use these powers for good, You don't want to do what they're doing, do good stuff. So here's what happens and how it applies to today's class. Your agent tells the seller about you, or his buyer agent does, or the receptionist does. And when they tell the seller about you, when they say, okay, well, you're going to get an email from my friend Jack that'll explain everything. And it's important that you go through it because it'll answer everything. Now, your realtor will go to a website, or the receptionist or whoever, when they're introducing that seller to you, they're going to go to a website that you have set up. This is a one-page website. It's tiny. It takes literally 60 seconds to set up. All you have is a blank for the seller's name and a blank for their email address and then their best phone number. This is called an opt-in page or a landing page. And what happens is that once the agent enters the seller's information is this. The curve kicks in. They're right here on the left-hand side of the curve, the very left of the curve, the introduction part. They just went from being a stranger to not a stranger. And now an email series begins, a process of indoctrination. And I suggest just using emails, not letters or actual physical mail until you've done a few deals and you can invest more money into this. So for right now, you can just use an autoresponder series. And I've talked a lot about this. The autoresponder is like one of the greatest inventions ever in marketing and compliance. It's basically a robot that sends emails out automatically. These are emails that have been pre-made and their frequency has been predetermined. So one email a day, one email a week, one email a month, whatever. And this robot can work basically forever. You can have it send one email a week for 100 years, 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years. It's just like this amazing thing. And to set one of these up used to cost so much money. Now you can set these up for free. So once the seller is entered, then your process starts. Now there's about 15 to 20 different things that you're going to include. These are called compliance assets. And man, these are badass. This is how you build a business and create income and do deals without ever talking to anybody. You'll see what I mean as we go through this. And I don't have time to cover everything, but for right now, I'll just cover a few things so you have enough to get started. So imagine the seller's going through this process of resistance, right? So you want to automatically help them move along the curve. So through email, they're going to get a recording of a conversation between you and your real estate agent where you explain the process of doing a lease option. The agent will ask questions and you will answer them. You'll explain the benefits, the risks, and what situation this is best suited for. You'll answer specific questions about legality. What happens if a tenant doesn't pay? How they won't be a landlord and they'll actually be selling their house. You'll talk about how if they're waiting to get a new loan and they're waiting to buy their new house until they sell this house, you'll explain how they can show this house is sold. Instead of if they rented it, for example, they could only show 75% of that monthly payment towards their mortgage payment and it would be coming from a renter. But if you do it your way, they can show that they have that property sold to a tenant buyer who's making the monthly payment and they can show that house is sold and show 100% of that monthly payment against their mortgage payment so they can go out and get a new loan. So this is like a real educational process that you're going to take these people through, which brings up something else that's very important. If you want people to think that you're smart, then make them smarter. There's almost nothing in this world that's more important than the way that you make other people feel. If you want them to think you're a genius, make them feel like a genius. Don't sell, educate. Don't be pushy, be helpful. Don't insist, but inform. And when you do this correctly, you won't have to close people. They'll be closing you. So as we move along this curve, we just talked about your sellers get a conversation with you and your real estate agent as he plays the part of the seller asking you questions that you answer. You also include a recording of a conversation that you have with your lender that explains the process of a tenant buyer getting a new loan and how they can show the house is sold so that the seller can get a new loan. You have a conversation with an attorney that explains the legality and the closing process and other questions. You're also going to explain the concept of vampire vacancies or vampire houses. Basically, you explain that whenever a house is neglected or empty or abandoned, as the value goes down of that house, as the value of that house goes down, it sucks the value of all the other houses in the neighborhood. And this is really important to explain because now you're not only educating them, but you're also paving the way for them to send you other business and refer you other business from around the neighborhood. This in itself can be a huge source of deals, as you'll see later, because you're creating viral components where people see a reason that you build a relationship with people that will outlast their need to sell that house. By the way, speaking of vampires, what do you get when you cross a snowman and a vampire? Frostbite. I know. Randall, I'm not even going to look at you. I know that was terrible. There he is, looking at the ground, just shaking his head. I know. It's terrible. I had no choice. I had to do it. It had to be done. All right. So another compliance asset is a call that you have with a seller. This is a seller who is a perfect match for the very action that you're suggesting your target seller take. In this case, a conversation with the seller where a lease option is a good fit. So you include that conversation so that your target can hear the exact situation that this makes sense for. You also want to include testimonials, probably the single most important part about this. this. This is an interview, a recorded call with a seller that did a lease option. You talk about how they had their previous problem and how you solved it, or how it was solved by doing a lease option, and how it's going so far, how it went. Now, what if you don't have any testimonials? No problem. First, you should go through my class on how to come up with killer testimonials and endorsements. Even if you're brand new to the business and you've never done anything, there's some pretty cool stuff there. And actually, like real, legit, and ethical ways to come up with and use testimonials and endorsements, even if you're brand new. So you want to check that class out. But for right now, a quick fix is to partner with a real estate investor that does have success stories. And you can interview some of their sellers, some of their past clients. This will be a testament or an endorsement of the process and not necessarily you. And you want to make sure that's clear, by the way, when you're talking to these people. And the investor can benefit from this as well. It's still a win-win because you could start doing deals and shadow this investor, be their apprentice. As you learn the process, you're actually making money at the same time. Remember, one of the best ways to learn anything is to have somebody who's already doing that thing and doing it artistically, and to work with them, have them as your mentor, your coach. And the best way to do this is to provide them business that you can work together on completing. So you're making them money while you're learning. So even if I'm not accepting applications right now, and even if you don't work with me, please realize that one of the biggest mistakes real estate investors make is not spending enough money and time getting trained by the right person. Okay, so on top of the testimonials, you also want to have a digital offer. This is going to be a way for the seller to email, fax, or call and basically sign the offer right then and there, so that you get offers signed and brought to you without ever talking to or even knowing the seller. And these sellers are going to be really informed. They aren't going to be idiots, because you have educated them. One of the greatest secrets of compliance and building your business is to create better buyers, smarter buyers. These are our empowered consumer policies. Basically, when somebody goes through your stuff, they should be pretty much a genius. Not just about you and your product, but about the industry in general, their choices, the historical context of their situation and choices, all sorts of other stuff. Basically, do what I do. And I really mean that. Think about, why do people always tell me that I'm such a genius and I'm so smart? First, it's because I am, right? No, but the real reason is because they go through classes like this and they feel smart. You want to do the same thing. So take in this process, for example, and you can tell this doesn't just apply to doing lease option deals, but this is how you can pick up any kind of deal. Remember, as a real estate investor, and you should know this from my other classes, there are basically only two ways that you'll ever buy property, either on terms or at a discount. You either buy low or you buy over time. And those are the two items there, terms or price. So you can buy any property anywhere in America or anywhere in the world at any price with enough time. So you can buy a $100,000 house for $1 million if you have enough time. Maybe you need 1,000 years or 1,000,000 years. And that's an extremity, but it illustrates the point. So when you talk to a seller, you can buy at their price on your time or on their time with your price. So in your process, you're not just going to talk about lease options, but also multiple mortgages, subject to, assignments, contract sales, contract deeds. And see, when you do this, you're not just creating a more aware and informed consumer, which is what's in their best interest, but you're also looking really smart because you're making them smart. So when they call you, they're ready to move. They can speak with intelligence about what they want help with because you've taught them what to say. And on this note of creating empowered consumers and smarter, better buyers, here's something else you want to include. You want to include a radio interview where a host is asking you questions. You don't actually have to get on the radio, although there are thousands of stations that you can get on for free, but a quick way to do this is to go to a site like voices.com or Odesk or Blog Talk Radio or iTunes or Podcast Assistants, and you can hire somebody to do this for pennies, like really, really cheap or even free. And they have high quality audio equipment because they've got those, those little trailer sound bites that, they go like, boom, you're listening to Dan the Metal Man on LA's hottest rock jock or whatever. And you could have like a retired DJ, for example, but they're still in the business, or they have the gear, they have the equipment, they still do gigs every now and then. So he comes on and says, welcome to the show, folks. This is your main man, Dan the Metal Man. And today's guest is real estate expert Jack Smith. And today we're going to talk about the 5 biggest scams facing homeowners in Johnson County. Or another title for that interview is 3 ways to sell your house for more than it's worth. And whether you do that interview or not, you definitely need to have the top 5 questions that you need to ask a real estate agent, a real estate investor, or any real estate professional before you even think of working with them. We always want these questions there because these questions are really powerful. People go through these, they love these things. Now, when it comes to these questions, you want to include questions like this with all your material. You should do this whether you do the radio interview or not. This is part of our Create the Standard protocol. So you want these sellers getting a list of questions that they can use, that they, scripts they can use, that they can ask. So if they talk to an agent or an investor, they ask things like, what's the current PHSI or the average DOM or refi or refill rate? This is the pending home sales index, by the way, the PHSI. It's an important gauge of the health of a market. The DOM is the days on the market, like we talked about earlier. And the refi rate is how often a lease option buyer refinances, or the refill rate, which is how often they resell or refill the property with another lease option buyer if that buyer falls through. And this is important stuff to give sellers because they will ask these questions. People love feeling smart, and they will attribute their newfound intelligence to you because people love feeling like insiders insiders. So anytime you could teach somebody an acronym like PHSI or DOM, they love that stuff because they feel like insiders. So you want to talk about the MLS, the CMA, the LTV. You want to use acronyms. And this doesn't just make them feel smart or feel like smart insiders, but they actually are becoming smarter insiders, smarter buyers, empowered consumers. In fact, they'll know more than most people who are in the business, who are in the industry. This is how you know that you're doing this right. So let's say a seller talks to an investor, they'll call them up and say, what's your freedom score or your most recent grade from the REFP? This is the Real Estate Fraud Prevention Department, the REFP. This is something else I go over in the class on creating the standard. But imagine the answers that they're going to get to this, the answers the seller's going to get when they actually go out and ask these questions. So think about an I buy homes guy who's like, yeah, I buy houses. I'll make you an offer you can't refuse, and it's like the typical I buy homes guy who's just hoping it works in his area. So he's like, yeah, I buy homes. And your seller goes into that conversation armed like a mother grabber. They're asking about the PHSI, the refill rates, and what's your REFP ranking? What was your recent grade? And the I buy homes guy is just like, they're just like stuttering and stammering because it makes you look like the only logical choice. And the cool thing is that when you make people insiders, they kind of want to show it off. They want to ask these questions. They want to have these conversations. They want to show off their smarts. They want to engage in this dialogue, in these conversations. They want to show that they're not some naive or ignorant seller that can be lied to or taken advantage of by some shady agent or investor. And you're empowering them to avoid that very situation. And a lot of times people will have these conversations in front of their friends or family because when they get off the phone, they want their friends to be like, wow, how did you know all that stuff? And then they tell them it's because of you. You see what this does? It's powerful shizzle. It's powerful stuff, man. It's brilliant stuff. I always ask people, and I've been doing this for years, ever since I started working with people back in my corporate days, which I don't believe I was in the corporate world, but as long as I've been working with people, I always ask them, what do you want to accomplish when you talk to people or when people come into your world, when people end a conversation with you or whatever interaction you have, what do you want people to walk away thinking? And of course, everybody says the same thing, that they want to do business with these people. I want them to buy from me. That's obvious. But there's like other things that are important too, right? For example, do you want to look like the only logical and ethical choice? Do you want to destroy your competition? Do you want to look like a genius who actually cares about your people? Do you want to make price irrelevant? And of course, the answers are always yes, but here's the thing. Unless you are specifically designing a process of indoctrination, unless you are doing this with premeditation and choreography, unless you are proactively planting ideas and reinforcing them, no matter what those ideas are, unless you're doing it on purpose, unless you're making yourself look like a genius on purpose, then it will only happen by accident. And that's one of the powers in creating this process. It's rehearsed, it's planned, and the results are predictables. Remember, that's the thing. We got to keep it predictable. It's really important. Think of it this way. This process, this sequence of indoctrination, this is worth more to a real estate investor than any of the real estate that they'll ever buy or invest in. Imagine you talk to a seller and then you record that conversation. Now that recording and the process of creating a compliance asset out of it is worth more than any of the money that you'll ever make on any given deal. And if you understand that, you are ahead of 99% of all those I buy homes guys and all the other real estate investors that you will ever meet in your entire life anywhere in the world, in any market that you enter. I mean, just think about this. If I had a money tree and I gave you two choices, I said, choice one, you can bring any bag or any container and you can take as much time as you want and fill that bag or that container or that dump truck or whatever you want to bring. You have as much time to fill it up with as much money as you want. Okay, so that's choice one. Choice two is I could give you the seeds, money tree seeds. So you could plant and harvest not just a tree, but a forest of your own money trees. Which one would you pick? The choice is obvious, right? Well, no, it's not to real estate investors. It's not. Nearly everybody in real estate's looking for a bigger bag because they picked the first choice. They don't realize the truth. And here it is. The seeds are always worth more than the fruit. And that's what setting this process of creating compliance assets and moving through your curve of compliance is. It's a license to command compliance. And to get money, you must first have compliance. So commanding compliance is commanding money. This is how you not only make yourself the standard to compare others against, but you're making price more and more irrelevant. You can create price inelasticity. You can go through my econ class for more on this, but basically, if you don't give people a ruler to measure you and others with, then they'll use their own ruler. And we're all trained to usually use price as our measure. You want to help people use a much, much better ruler. And the more you do that, the less important pricing becomes. This is true with any business or any product or any service. You want to be able to charge 10 times as much for something and be able to raise your price at will. And it starts with creating a better ruler, a better standard to compare against. That's what creating compliance assets and the way that I'm showing you, that's what this does. Now, I recommend taking this a step further because you want to take those recordings, you want to have them transcribed and edited and then turn it into a book. Have a front and back cover design. And I went over this a lot more in another class, but basically your entire table of contents is a list of questions. And that's a real pivotal part of all of this. All you ever have to bring to any of these recordings, any of these conversations or any conversation you're ever going to have with a consumer, with a provider, with your team, you ever need to bring into those conversations is the right questions. That's all you need to do all of this, to do everything I'm saying. Just ask the right questions, first of yourself and then of others. And getting stuff transcribed and getting it put together in a book costs pennies, and you can use a good way when you have this book in place. You want to use a good title, like the book on selling your house creatively, quickly, and for top dollar, or the book on how to sell your house in 30 days or less, or the book on how to sell your house if you're behind on payments, in foreclosure, and you owe the bank more than your house is worth. When you do this, think about when your realtor introduces people to you. They can say, I have a friend who's a specialist in selling houses. He actually wrote the book on how to sell your house for 10% more than it's worth. You see how that works? It's a phrase. When people say somebody's an expert or somebody's really good at something, they say he wrote the book on blank. But in this case, it's actually true. It's a pretty cool thing. All right, so back to our curve. Think about all the indoctrination that we're adding, especially when you include that book in this process. And also, by the way, in that class that I did on this, I go over how to get your book done and how to make millions with it without ever selling a single copy. And this is part of how you can do that, because you get so much business from that book. But also remember that you don't actually have to type or write a single word. And you can do it my way, and you can get the entire book done in less than a weekend. It's one of our weekend models, so it's pretty cool stuff. You want to go check that out. And also, I should say, as a side note, including that, man, you guys are just so damn lucky. I hope you realize how lucky you are. Back in my Wall Street days, I used to have to send people an audio CD. And before that, or actually around the same time, we used to send people a VHS tape. VHS. You know, there's some people today who have never actually seen or held a VHS tape. Actually, a lot of people haven't even seen one in real life. And I'm not that old. It wasn't that long ago. But to give you an idea of how old VHS is, there's actually a franchise of horror movies titled VHS. And it wasn't that long ago, but imagine if you guys had to do that. Later, we used to send DVDs. And this was stuff I used to send and we used to use when we were raising money for IPOs. And then later, when I got into real estate for listings, when I would go to buy a house or when I would list a house, it was first when I listed them, but then when I'd buy them, I would send people DVDs or CDs or VHS tapes in the mail before I met with them. This cost thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars a month. My point is that it's so much easier for you guys to do the same thing. You can do it better, cheaper, and faster than at any other time in history. Be grateful for that. It's such an exciting time to be alive. You can do everything I'm talking about, every part of the compliance curve, with just your cell phone and nothing else. Okay, my point is that you guys are really, really lucky. So be thankful, be grateful for how much easier this is. Be grateful for this opportunity to be able to put these things in place so easily. Everything is easier, and you are closer to more and more opportunity and higher levels of potential than any other group of human beings to ever walk the earth. Be grateful. And I don't mind you borrowing stuff from me. People copy stuff from us all the time. Sometimes they try to do it without asking, then they go out and try selling it, and they call themselves gurus. It's crazy. People have been trying to pull that mother shizzle for years. But who can blame them, right? And you know, Randall, when they try stealing and imitating, they're not just putting us on a pedestal, but it's more like a plateau, right? The highest form of flattery, Randall. Nothing. Give me something. No? Oh, man. Was it that bad? I didn't think it was that bad. I know. Randall's not impressed. He never is. Such a tough crowd, eh? Rodney Dangerfield. Nothing? Still nothing. Okay, so you guys, you can start with these recordings, right? Because they're faster, they're easier to do sometimes. Because sometimes, people get weird about being on camera. But as soon as possible, you want to do the same things, but do them with video instead. So you can hire somebody to start with for $10 or something to add slides to your audio recordings. And now you have a video with your picture on it. So they can see you, they can see who you are, and you can start that way. But you can also do the recording in video, the actual recording itself. With Google Hangouts, Skype, FaceTime, this stuff is all free. And when people see you, it really helps to solidify your relationship with them. It's the closest thing to being right there in front of someone. And it doesn't have to be professional looking at all. It actually is kind of endearing if it's just like you and your car. So you can do a quick interview with your agent about a lease option. And then from now on, even if you never work with that agent again, you'll have a compliance asset that you can use forever. And it lets people get to know you and see who you are. And all this stuff is free, by the way. Lucky ducks, you guys. Lucky ducks. And another thing you do is that you create what we call the big deal factor, which basically means that when you put this stuff in place, you'll build this kind of mini celebrity. So when people actually talk to you, they'll kind of freak out. It's weird, I know. But I can tell you, well, think of it this way. Imagine that right after you watch this video, even if it's the first thing you've ever heard from me, you have no idea who I was 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, but right after you watch this video, I called you up. It would be, a little weird, right? And I know this because sometimes when people talk to me, they just lose their minds, man. They act like they're talking to Ben Affleck or something. I've had people actually say they feel like they're talking to the president. It's crazy, I know. But that's what this does, because over time they recognize you, they get to know you, they respect you and the help that you've done for them. And it's light years ahead of just being an I buy homes guy calling them up and hearing questions like, who are you again? You know what I mean? This is a world of difference. There's also an inherent credibility when you record something because people think it's less likely that you're going to lie or mislead them on a recording that anybody can hear or watch. So let's take a step back and look at what's happening here with our curve, with our compliance curve. First, we have a powerful introduction. Then after that, they get a chunk of our stuff, and then over time, they get helpful references. So they're getting you talking about lease options and other ways that you can buy their home and help them with their problem. They get a breakdown of the process with you and a professional, like an agent or an attorney, explaining what happens next and then what happens after that. And then after that, they're getting a lender explaining the process and how it helps them and who this makes sense for. They're getting your testimonials and feedback and success stories from others. We're also including stuff like the vampire house training. So even if they never sell their house with you or they never work with you, they can still benefit from hearing from you and working with you. And they're getting the ability to make an offer and or just call in and sell their house. They're getting deeply educated so they don't get ripped off or taken advantage of. They're getting videos from you so they can see and hear you. You build a relationship with them. They feel like they know you. They're getting questions to ask other real estate investors and agents so they become, they're becoming more empowered and they don't become a victim. And there's a whole bunch more stuff that we included, things that you can do, but I'm already way past our time here, so we got to wrap this up. The point is that this process takes people by the hand and it walks them through all their concerns, objections, questions, fears, and problems and leads them right to compliance. Having this process in place does all the hard work for you. It does the heavy lifting for you so you can focus on making sure that you have a powerful introduction once you have this in place. You want a new moving parade of people to be introduced because once they're introduced, the machine kicks right in. And remember, right now we're just talking about using emails. We can add other points of contact later, but the point is the machine kicks in and out the other end, we end up with transactions and lifetime clients. It's like owning that room from A Clockwork Orange where you brainwash people. And once you have that, all you need to do is have a way to introduce people to it. Now that I think about it, that's probably not the best comparison, but you get the point. You get the idea. You're basically taking the best version of everything you have to say and you're capturing it, imprisoning that brilliance digitally so it can be used again and again and again. And let me tell you, I walk students through every step of getting this put in place and doing this, but one of the reasons that this is so powerful is that almost nobody knows about it. But even if they did, most people in the world are just unwilling to go through these steps. They're unwilling to do it. That's true for most people in the world, but especially in America. So even if you don't have me walking you through this, you can still put this in place and know that anybody you ever come across is not going to pose any threat to your business. Almost none of them are going to be willing to do this. And it's crazy because with this process, just like with everything else I teach, all the work is front loaded. So it looks kind of like this. The red line is the work and the blue line is the return. There's an inverse relationship. The work is all up front, but then with the diminishing input of work, you continue to see an increasing return. And that just continues over time. And this isn't really what it looks like. This is kind of what it looks like if we chart it. In reality, it looks more like this. It's not a symmetrical X, it's an asymmetrical X because the work can be done in a very short period of time and the increasing returns start immediately and they continue indefinitely. This is the definition of subtraction. As you go, the less and less work is required to achieve not the same or consistent or static returns, but increasing returns. And you only have to do this with three groups of people or three things: consumers, providers, and transactions. And eventually your input is not only zero, but it's not required at all for your company to grow. So it's not zero input and the same return. It's zero input and an enhanced and increasingly enhanced return, a gradually growing return. And like I said, almost nobody, especially real estate investors, ever do this. They never really build a business. And if you want to know if you're building this right, think of what happened in your business today. What was the total net result of today? Think about that. Now ask yourself, if you want to repeat that result or improve that result tomorrow, would it require the same or more input from you? If so, you're not building a business. You just have a job. Okay, and I cover that stuff more elsewhere, but for right now, we got to move on. So it's easy to see. It should be clear that once you enter, once you have a seller into this process, you get moving in a really great direction. You educate sellers, you make yourself and them look like geniuses, you gain compliance in an unprecedented way. It's just overall pretty badass. So this is the part of the process that allows you to gain compliance and get houses coming to you without ever talking to anybody. In fact, without ever eventually lifting a finger. And if you just did this, you would get calls from sellers saying, okay, please come take my house. If you could, please, pretty please, whenever you get a chance. I know you're busy, right? That's the kind of calls you get. But this class is more than just about that because we need to go a step further with this. We want to subtract ourselves not just from the buying, but also the selling of the houses. So after you add a seller to this process, what happens when they call back? What happens when they're ready to go? How do you work with those deals? How do you move them and make money and eventually do it without ever talking to anybody? Okay, so this is where things get really cool. See, the conversation that happens when a seller calls is going to be pretty simple and basic. I mean, it really is like, hi, I want to do this right now. Please come help me get this done yesterday. And there isn't much to sell or close or get pushy with because the education has already done the heavy lifting, remember? When they call, they've already moved themselves to the right side of the curve and really to the very tail end. So to handle this part of the transaction, you are going to hire your real estate agent to sell those houses as well. Now, it can be the same agent that brought you the deal, or you can hire another agent. It really doesn't matter, as long as you pick the one that you like the most that does the best job for your people. And these aren't hard deals to sell, by the way. In fact, a little WBE 101, anytime you have a property, especially one that you're going to do a lease option with, if you know what you're doing and you follow my stuff correctly, you should be able to move any property within 30 days at the most if you just use signs, ads, and your buyer's list. You don't even need all three. You only need just one. Just one or just two can work. In fact, signs alone can easily do this, especially when you get closer to doing them like an artist, the way I've talked about in the way that I teach. And actually, in the signs class, which you should all go through, I go over this in depth because I just go over, my goodness, just the beautiful ways that these guys and girls on our team have come up with to do signs. Man, it has got to be like the greatest class ever made on how to make a fortune from putting out signs. These guys are geniuses. It's a brilliant class. It's just a masterpiece. You guys got to check it out. So signs alone are more than enough to get this going, to move every one of these houses. But after, as you're putting up signs, you're going to end up with a buyer's list. And when you build a solid relationship with them, you don't even need signs to sell your houses because you've got your relationship with your buyers. In fact, I've gone over examples where students have sold houses within minutes of picking them up because they already had buyers waiting. This is how you start stacking multiple checks in a day, where you have one day where you pick up 2 or 3 houses and you sell them all that very same day. You pick up an extra 5, 10, 15, 25 grand in one day because you're selling them so fast. It's a great concept. But here's one way, if you're just starting out, here's one way this works and how to get this going. So you get a call from a seller who's gone through the material. They've gone through the education / indoctrination and they're ready to go. And let's say this is a lease option deal or really any kind of deal. It could be a contract or a subject to a rehab or an assignment, whatever. But right now I'm just sticking to lease option deals. These are usually going to be the least profitable deals. It's one of the reasons why I'm sticking with them. So you know that you'll hit at least 10 grand a month and probably usually more than that. And we're only talking about the money now part of these deals. So at that point, once the seller calls, your agent is going to take the call and get the contract, which is basically a 1-page LOI, a letter of intent. And then at that point, the agent is trained in the basics of putting out signs. And they can have an assistant or a buyer's agent do this, and we'll talk about how to get them paid in a second. But the agent is basically going to do 3 things. They're going to market the house, in this case with signs. They're going to show the house to buyers. They can do this with a lockbox on the property. And lastly, they're going to close the deal. So you're going to hire your agent to handle this side of the transaction as well, the selling of the house as well. So when a buyer comes through and they look at the house and they have the money for the down payment, let's say it's $5,000, the agent will get them in touch with the lender immediately to make sure that it's possible for them to get a loan in 1 to 3 years if they fix their credit issues. And this way, the buyer is worked with to make sure they clean their credit and they fix their bad items so that they can get a loan on this house down the road in 1 to 3 years, maybe longer. And when you do this, it doesn't really matter how bad someone's credit is. If you focus on cleaning and staying clean, you can fix just about any problem on your credit, even bankruptcy, in 1 to 3 years, especially if you're going to get a loan for a house that you already live in and have lived in for years and paid that monthly payment on time every month. So you're doing a tremendous service for these buyers. So when that looks good on the buyer's end, the agent's going to take that buyer directly to the attorney's office. And this could be right at a title company, for example. It doesn't really matter where it is, but you want to make sure an attorney's closing the deal. The buyer will put their money into a holding account immediately. They'll sign their part of the purchase agreement of the lease and the option. The closing basically is happening right there. And this is important because you want to move fast, really fast. Sometimes with houses like this, you may be fighting off a pending foreclosure or a nasty divorce or some other looming problem. But in any case, it's always in the seller's best interest and the buyer's best interest and the agent's best interest, everybody's best interest to move fast. And for the buyers, this is how you get them loving you. Imagine a buyer calls a sign to see about a house. They go look at it, and then that same afternoon, they go and do their part of the closing. They love this because they can get the keys to that house and start moving in the next day, or sometimes the very same day that they called on the sign. It's beautiful. So help people move fast. In general, I should just take a second and say this is a huge secret. So many people want fast results, but they refuse to look at fast results as just that, a result. When you look at it as a result, it forces you to look at the cause. Fast output, it requires a fast input. So move fast. This will put you in a league of your own. People want instant gratification, and when you can help them get that, they will love you for it. We just had a student who had a buyer call him about a house that the seller was still living in. They hadn't moved anything out of that house, and when the buyer went to put their money down, they saw the house, they loved it, they talked to the lender, everything was good, so they went to put their money down, and when they did that, they talked to the seller and they were trying to arrange a closing date. And the seller said that they wanted to move fast too, but they needed a few days to move to get all their stuff out of the house. And then the buyer offered to the seller, well, why don't we help you move your stuff today? The seller said, okay. And then the buyer brought his 2 big boys, his 2 big sons over. And that day, it was that evening that they started moving the seller's stuff out of that house. They helped them move out of their house and move into their other place. And when they were done, they started moving their stuff in the house. Think about that. A buyer called a sign on a house that a seller was still living in. And by that night, he emptied that house and started moving his stuff in. That's how you want to move. And I really stress this moving fast stuff because so many people move at this glacial pace because they're frozen with fear and hesitation. We call them gargoyles. They're just cemented in place because of ignorance, comfort, laziness, fear. You got to move fast. There's an experiment that I always recommend people do. If you want to see how much hesitation will cost you, try this. Talk to any group of buyers, 10 buyers, 30 buyers, 100 buyers, whatever. And then a week later, call them up and see what kind of insanely large amount, like a percentage-wise, maybe it's 10%, maybe 30, maybe 50% or more of those buyers have already moved just in that tiny span of time. These peoples are going to move with or without you. But you want to be so good that working with you is so obviously in their best interest that they'd feel crazy to be without you. But realize hungry people will feed. They are going to move. When people have an itch, they're going to look for 50 things to scratch it with. Now you're starting from scratch, scratching your head, strapped for cash, and they're unpacking because you got lapped. Don't be so stupid. Here's the way to look at it. Don't let that happen. Here's the way to look at it. Whenever you're working with somebody, are they fighting and struggling to keep up with you, or are you struggling to keep up with them? Always be the faster one. Whenever a seller or a buyer or really anybody asks you how fast you can move, the answer in your head should always be the same. Faster than you. Right, Randall? Of course. Randall knows that. Here it is, guys. Be as intense as a fire at a circus. Part of being grateful and having gratitude is to understand or realize that you're in a fairy tale of opportunity. All you need is desire to make it happen. So breathe fire, but don't be dragon. Move fast. Yeah. Really, really fast. Remember, that's the goal. And even if a buyer is a total stranger to you, they can get the process started and finished from the time it takes to get from the house to the attorney's office. And that assumes that they haven't already been in touch with your lender and gotten themselves squared away financing wise. But they could have already done all this because there's a separate compliance curve for buyers. So they can be ready to go and be pre-screened and qualified before all this happens. But in the worst case scenario, it can still be done right then and there. And then the seller is notified so they can go and get the official closing can be done and the move-in dates can be set and everything can be finalized that day. So that's how you close these deals really fast and remotely from anywhere in the world and in any market in the world. Now let's talk about paying your agent. Remember, when you build your team, when you build things the way that I teach, everybody should be getting paid. You don't want to be stingy about this. You want to make sure that your people are getting paid and that they're happy. Don't be a cheapskate about this or you'll be skating on thin ice with rollerblades and ankle weights. Make sure your peoples are getting paid. In this case with a real estate agent, you want to make sure that they make good money on these deals. One of the big problems with agents is their constrained thinking, and that's actually a problem with most people in business, but it's really important that you work with your agent and that everyone sees the value in what they're doing with you. And specifically when they're doing this, you want it to be in their best interest and you want to make sure that that's clear. So I think we teach like 15 or 20 or 25 different ways to pay your agents and to pay them well. You want to keep them smiling, keep them cheesing, but here are just a few ways to make sure they get their cheddar. Number one, you can pay the agent their full commission on the back end when the home refinances. When you do this, the agent will make 2 to 4 times their usual commission. For example, let's say the house is a $150,000 house and the agent would have been paid, let's say 6% if they had sold it. That means that from that 150, it would have cost the seller about $9,000. So the seller would have gotten $141,000 from the sale. They would have paid $9,000 to the agents, and usually the agent would have been representing the seller and not the seller and the buyer, so they would have gotten $4,500. Now, if you sell that same home on terms with the lease option, you can raise that price because anytime you sell on terms, remember you can raise the price, and usually you can raise the price by at least 10%. But even if you just raise the price just that 6%, so it sells for $159,000 instead of $150,000, now the agent can get that same $9,000 difference, but they don't have to split it with another agent. So they make twice as much money on that deal, and the seller will get $150,000 instead of $141,000. So it's a win-win. The downside is that they do have to wait. In the meantime, though, the agent can get payments, which brings us to the second way to get them paid. Number 2 is financing their commission. This is a huge secret, and almost nobody in real estate understands this. I did a whole class on how an agent can make an extra 10 grand, and we covered this. It was a class on how an agent can make an extra 10 grand a month. So you want to check that out, and it should help understand this more. So let's say the agent does a lease option, and they say, you know what, I'll get payments of, let's say, just $300 a month. And the seller won't be paying for it. It'll be the buyer who's paying for it every month, the lease option tenant buyer. Well, even at just $300 a month, if you're doing 3 deals a month the way that you're going to be doing with your agents, in 6 months, the agent's making over $5 grand a month just from those residual payments. In 12 months, those payments are over $10,000 a month just from those residuals. Not long ago, we worked with an agent and we helped him get this going, and then a few other agents wanted to learn how to do it. So Millie did a special special workshop and we let some other brokers know about it. It was basically just a simple, it was like we were just going to go over some simple and creative ways that agents can add an extra 5 to 10 grand a month to their business and sell homes much faster without impacting their current business. And as a favor, she agreed to do that one-day workshop for only $1,000. And there were over 150 agents there. So that's a quick side note. When you get good at this, you can do special workshops like this for your agents and make a quick 6 figures. But it's also a great way to screen those agents and pick the realtors out of that group that you want to work with. So any one of them can go out and do it the way that you're going to teach them, but you can also pick the ones that you like the most and work with them and build these income streams individually with 5 or 10 different people. So it's a great way to add agents to your bullpen. Now at the workshop, by the way, there was one agent who Millie picked to start doing deals with, and this is all he did. He brought her lease option deals from hard to sell houses, and then he financed his commission this exact way, exactly that we've talked about today. And in less than 9 months, his residuals were over 26 grand a month. And it didn't impact his other business at all. The only houses he brought were the ones that weren't selling anyway. So this is really killer. And for more on this, you can go over the class that I did on this. But for right now, let's move on to number 3. Number 3, the third way to pay your agent is when you close these lease option deals, you give them a portion or split the down payment with them. So you're going to pay them when you get paid. This will depend on the volume and the transaction size because you want to make sure you're hitting your 10 grand a month. So you can adjust the numbers any way you want to make sure you're happy and they're happy. But when an agent rents a house, for example, they may make 1 month's rent. That might be their payment. So you can help them do that in these cases too. Another way is just to pay them $50 or $100 an hour, but don't actually pay them until the deal closes. And remember, we have someone doing signs or calling up the expires. We can have the agent do a little arbitrage where they're going to pay them $10 an hour and you pay them $50 an hour for that work, but you pay them at closing. And keep in mind, their agent isn't really doing a whole lot here. Think about how much time it takes, just a couple hours a week, if that. All right, so those are the 3 basic ways to make sure your agent gets paid. And really, you should consider for a moment what they're actually doing, because remember, there isn't much involved in these deals. You have the process in place that does all the heavy lifting. And they can have their office receptionist, an assistant, an intern, a buyer's agent, a seller's agent, anybody really. They can have one person do just about everything. Think back to our stacking policies flowchart here. Remember, when we have a goal and then we build multiple ways to get there, we stack policies. Well, we aren't even talking about all these other ways, right? We don't even need to get into other expireds or rehab deals or code violations or eviction notices or Section 8 guys or second or third time listings or recently reduced or handyman specials or income units or bank repos or foreclosures or fire damaged houses or absentee orders, or you get the idea. We don't even need to touch into all these other worlds of opportunity. But imagine how much money you make when you approach each of those the same way we're approaching this. I'm leaving a lot out because we don't need it to get to our 10 to 30 grand a month. And once the process is in place, you can scale that 10 grand way out. Because think about this, once we have our curve in place, your agent is doing the introduction. They're going to introduce people here. And to do that, they're basically doing just 3 simple things: their own listings, expireds in their office, and not sellings in their office. When you look at that work involved in their own listings, it's basically a 30-second conversation with people that they're talking to anyway. With the expireds, a receptionist can call the seller because the seller will know him, or at least they'll know the business or the realty group that they're calling from. And then that same person can also do the nearly expireds. So when you think about having more and more agents from that office that start feeding this process, when they all start sending their not selling or their hard to sells, or letting any of their clients know about a simple way to move houses creatively. And remember, you only need 3 deals out of these potentially hundreds of houses out there. You see what I'm saying? And this is how you pick up houses. This is one way that you can pick up houses, how you can get inventory subtractively without spending any time on it. And then to move these houses, we use the same agent or another agent that we have to close those transactions. And here again, we stack policies again with signs, ads, and your buyers list. But remember, all we're talking about today is just signs, because it's more than enough to hit our goal here of 10 grand a month. And later we can have the agent in charge of our buyers list, or we can hire somebody to work on their team, on the agent's team, and talk to our buyers all day long. So when people are ready to go and they have money, that buyer's agent is working directly, very closely with buyers. And we just want to keep raising the criteria. So to be on that VIP buyers list, you have first, maybe it's 5 grand, then it's 10 grand, then it's 25 grand down, then maybe it's 30 grand down. Because remember, these people are going to jump. These buyers are going to jump. We just want to make sure we're moving faster and better than anyone else so that they're jumping with us and it's in their best interest to work with us. Now, once this machine is in place, this becomes one iteration, right? One oil well. It's pumping out 10 grand a month. And then what do we do? What do we always do after one successful pass? After one completed iteration, what happens? That's right. You do like a hungry clock and you go back 4 seconds. We build the same thing again. These are self-containing systems and we do the same process to build it again and again and again. Self-similarity, the same thing at different magnifications. This is the mentality that you build a business with, a real business with. Not out there being a landlord or doing rehab deals or trying to do Twitter better. None of that stuff is what is really going to build you a business. This is how you build a serious cash cow. And I don't mean the details when we're talking about the agents. I mean the overall mentality, the thinking that goes into this. And when it comes to paying your agents and paying your team, it really comes down to understanding the kinds of money now, money over time, and money later. So you can work with these variables and find something that fits and makes everyone happy. One thing I should add is that whenever you split something or come up with an arrangement, the question you should ask yourself is, are you okay with either one? So if you split it up, let them pick which one they want, and you should be okay with whatever their choice is. See, the goal is to get to 10 to 30 grand a month with each of these iterations. And until you get there, I don't recommend doing any kind of long-term deals. Don't mess with equity or cash flow until you're making a consistent 10 to 30 grand a month. So your money now should be at that level. I wouldn't worry about the money later or money over time. Get the money now to 10 to 30 grand a month consistently and predictably. That is the top priority. And I've covered all the reasons for this in the SA class, which you definitely should check out. Go to WeBuildEmpires.com, where you definitely want to check that class out. But when it comes to working with others, whether it's agents or anybody else, there's something else I want to warn you about. And this is not letting your ego get the best of you. If somebody ever takes advantage of you, or they're nasty to you, or they're mean to you, or whatever happens, just move on. Don't get nasty. Don't go high school on them. Do not escalate. I've seen this get so many people into trouble. Just be thankful that your ideas and your policies have worked, and just have gratitude that the world works the way it does and everybody gets back what they put out. Never be afraid to give more. Be more than fair. Everything works out and nobody gets away with anything. All goodwill that you give is always returned in one way or another times 10. All right, so before we end here, let's go over some examples of how students, how people on our team and our friends have gone out and used the stuff in today's class. They went out, they started making it happen, started stacking all kinds of G's, and how you can do the exact same thing. So Adrian Carvello was working with Trisha, and he started this exact model. So he built his compliance curve out in the way that I teach. It took a little more than a weekend, but during that time, he was interviewing agents and lenders. And when he started out, he picked 6 agents to work with. Now, of those 6 agents, 2 were much better than the others. He still made money with the others, but I'm just going to talk about how much money he made with these 2 agents. So in month 1, one agent added or introduced 3 sellers, and the other agent introduced 2 sellers. So remember, this means that they started right here, right on the left of the curve, at the far left, the very beginning. Then the indoctrination process takes over, right? So in the first month, from those 5 sellers, he did 1 deal and made $6,000. So $6,000 in his first month. Now, in month 2, one agent introduced 8 sellers and the other one introduced 5. And Adrian did 3 deals out of that group for a total net profit of $13,600. So he's already over $10,000 in 1 month by month 2. But it's not every month, and it's not with each agent. Well, in month 3, one agent introduced 16 sellers and the other agent introduced 11 sellers. And out of that group, he closed 8 deals. So in month 3, he closed 8 deals and made over $26,000 for the month. Now, it's interesting how those numbers jumped, right? And this will happen because as you do these deals, people see how beneficial it is. Like the agents and the people on your team, they start seeing how much money they can make, and you'll get more compliance from them. But on top of that, what happens is a snowball effect from previous sellers and people moving along the curve. So even if you stop introducing new people, you'll still have a steady flow of business from the previous people because you gradually move them along the curve. And he's been consistently making 20 to 25 grand a month, which really is only, like 1.5 deals per week, less than 2 deals a week. And again, don't focus on the actual money because it's a result. So instead look at the cause and the simplicity of the cause. This is just from 2 agents, and they're doing this very part-time. And remember, when we talk about introducing people, all this takes from your team, from your agents, is that they go to your website and they put the seller's name and email into a small form. It takes 2 seconds. And also they're first, calling up the seller and letting them know about you and that they should expect to hear from you and they should expect some help from you if they want it. And this is why you have such great compliance. It's an endorsed introduction. This is why you can do so well with so few people. These conversion rates are insane. And especially when you think about the profit per transaction. No direct mail people, no marketers, no people that have any experience with consumers and marketing and the kind of 1% or 0.5% return rate on direct mail. They have such a hard time believing that you can have such high compliance and such a high transaction rate. But the reason that you can do this is because you followed my instructions on setting this up and making sure that your compliance curve is done correctly and that it helps people draw the correct conclusions and internalize the right ideas. And then second, you're making sure that qualified and appropriate people are being introduced. But thirdly, and this is really important, is that the introduction is done properly. And this is so important in part because you need these people to actually go through what you send them. That's why it's important that that first conversation, the introduction, is done well, is done correctly. And it won't happen if it's seen as spam, right? It doesn't matter how well your compliance curve is set up. If it's seen as spam or it's not positioned correctly, they won't go through it. They'll disregard disrespect it. They won't believe you. That's why the introduction is so important. In a second, I'll show you just how powerful that first conversation can be and how you can do it correctly without ever trying to sell or negotiate or being pushy, and by doing something that may seem like it would never work. It's pretty cool. We'll go over that in a second, but first, let's look at another example of making sure that you get to $10,000 a month from your first month with mathematical movement. So you can pick agents who have X number of people in their brokerage. Let's say 50 or 100 other agents, for example. Now let's say that 1 out of 3 agents that you work with will execute well enough or will be a good enough fit for you. But we'll even say that instead of 3 deals a month, they're only doing 1 deal a month. Now to do that, let's say that we need 5 or 10 or 15 sellers introduced to you. That number isn't as important right now because we can always adjust that number and the number of agents you work with or the criteria in selecting them based on the seller count. It's just important you know what that seller count is and how many you need to have a deal a month. And those are different examples, real life examples of 5, 10, or 15. But even if you're at 1 out of 3 agents, and even if they only execute enough for just not 3 deals a month, but just for 1 deal a month, that means that if you properly screen and interview 10 agents, you'll end up with doing 3 deals a month total, which would be at least $10,000 a month. So if you talk to 1 agent every 3 days, you can make 10 grand a month. You would make 10 grand a month. You see what I'm saying? Now that may sound crazy, but that's the exact test that Zach Lee put 2 of our students through. And with one, the numbers weren't totally clear because they did do a few rehab deals and deals on the side. But with the other one, Dana Balvin, this is exactly what she did. Just talking to 1 agent every 3 days. And in her first month, she had 4 deals. She cleared over 10 grand a month. In the second month, it was $13,000. And then in the third month, it jumped to over $20,000. And that again is because of the effect that the curve has. Over time, you'll do more deals and have more compliance with people, not less. Your work and efforts will pay more and more over time. The return isn't diminishing, it's increasing, even though the work is diminishing. The input diminishes, but the output is increasing, gradually increasing over time. And it's just a powerful concept, right? It's like just when you think about it, it's really a powerful thing. Talking to 1 agent every 3 days and having this kind of compliance is crazy because you bake in, you prepare for, you have the way you set this up, bad numbers or poor execution is kind of baked into the pie. Even if only 1 out of 3 agents work out, and even if instead of doing 3 deals, they do 1 deal, you can still adjust your input to make sure that you hit your target goal and your target income. You see what I'm saying? Now, here is one of my favorite kinds of examples like this. So we talked about how important the introduction is, right? But you may have already thought, do I even need an agent? This class is about hiring an agent, hiring a realtor to do both the buying and the selling. But when you think about this process, it can work in a lot of different ways with or without having an agent doing the buying, doing the introduction. So you can still have an agent do the selling, or really you don't even need an agent to do that, but you could. In this case, we'll keep them around because it doesn't change the overall point. And once you understand this, you're really close to being in a league of your own. Shakespeare once wrote that the world's all a stage and we're nothing but actors or something like that. And if you look at your business that way, it'll really help because it's much easier to build oil wells when you look at it this way. So if you look at the buying and selling and the introduction of people into your compliance curve here, if you look at those pieces, then all you really ever need is some method of execution. MOE, a method of execution. Some way of getting these things done. Now you could slowly subtract yourself from each part of this, and once you build it correctly and subtract yourself correctly, you'll have divisions of your business that are running on their own. And not just running, but even growing on their own. And that's being done by the ranks that you have hired, employed, and properly trained to carry out the work. The method of execution. It'll be either people or technology. And here's a great example of what I'm talking about. Trisha had a student, Mark Stope, and he made good money at his job. He wasn't as hungry to put things in place because he made so much money at his job. At least that's the way things were at first. And this is a side lesson, by the way, because if you learn this stuff from me, it'll stay with you for the rest of your life. So it doesn't matter if you put it in place immediately or not. You'll still have the knowledge and the skill to change your income class at will, and you can create that social mobility for yourself and others for the rest of your life, whether you do it right now or not. And you never know when something might come up where you'll have to do it later. And that's what happened in Mark's case. Things went south. He lost his good job. Things got shaky with his marriage, and he ended up getting divorced. So he went from having a good job, making over 6 figures, to divorced, unemployed, and broke in a pretty short period of time. So for months and months, he was a student, but he really didn't do that much. And I'm not picking on him. He would admit this. He was not the best, the ideal version of a student because he was comfortable. But his situation deteriorated, and it got to a point where he was actually trapping squirrels for food. He was capturing, killing, and cooking squirrels from his yard and around the neighborhood. He was actually eating squirrels. That's where he was at. That's how bad it had got. He eventually got a job changing oil in cars. So he was getting paid like half minimum wage, right? Not the ideal situation. Not much money. He was losing his house. So things were still getting worse even after he got his job. So eventually, after this downward spiral, eventually something happened, as it always does, and he snapped. With his back against the wall, he finally got to that place, that moment where he was at was more painful than fixing it, than moving forward. So he started to execute. Now, even though he was working 14 to 16 hours a day just to pay his mortgage, so even though some could look at his situation and say that he didn't have enough time to do what we've talked about today, he still put pieces of this in place. So he put the basic parts of the curve in place, and he did it in a single day while he was at work. I remember talking to him, and Trisha was on the line too, and he scheduled out every minute of that first day. So if you break up your day into 19-minute chunks, which is something I recommend, by the way, it shouldn't be the first time you've heard that, use 19-minute time blocks. Once you do that, it becomes much easier to get a lot more done, because for the average person, if you just worked on your business for 1 or 2 or even just 3 19-minute blocks in one day, you would get more done on your business than most people get done in years, and you would get that done in one day. So he put the basic parts of the compliance curve in place almost overnight, got a few basic recordings so people could get a relationship going with them, just the basic parts of this. And it isn't that hard to do when you follow what we've talked about today. I've already done all the hard work for you. So now Mark did something pretty cool. And this is what, it's just, I love this case, and I hope you guys take as much away from this as others have. See, he hated the idea of selling or being pushy or always be closing the ABCs, right? As most people do. So instead, he approached this in another way that I teach. And that is to have a deep, emotionally invested conversation, emotional assignment. Basically, you just make a friend. That's how it works. Instead of having a short, pointed conversation, how much do you want, and getting short with sellers, you do the exact opposite. You have a long, drawn-out conversation, and you touch on everything from where they went to school, what they like to eat, when they got married, when they got divorced, usually, you know? You just make a friend. You get to know them better. You find out what drives them, what motivates them, their likes and dislikes. You just get to know them, and you just be a friend. You don't time the conversation. You know, you don't time this conversation because you don't time any conversation with a friend, right? So it may be a few minutes, it may be a half hour, maybe 45 minutes, it may be much longer. This is a skill, you know, being likable and making the secret to being likable is making the other person seem likable. This is a skill, and there are specific parts in dialogue that you can use to make people open up, to disarm their objections, and to endear yourself to, you know, to open the path to this. It's just a matter of getting trained and practice and making sure you're using the right dialogue algorithms. But this is not that. This is a skill. It's not hard to learn. It just takes dedication. So that's what he did. That's what Mark did. He just talked to one seller every 2 or 3 days. That was it. These weren't these negotiation tactics or any tough, rough conversations. He just made a friend every 2 to 3 days. And you know, when you have this process in place, when you've built the curve out and your indoctrination correctly, then it, not you, will do the heavy lifting. It'll do most, if not all, of the work that needs to happen to solidify that relationship and turn it into a transaction and turn it into business. So your goal isn't just to make a friend, but to make sure that your relationship with them is done in such a way that they will make sure to go through everything that they get from you because you guys are friends. You have a trusted relationship with them. It really comes down to just care, you know? People pick up on that. Just care about your people, love them, and then let the process take over. Just focus on making sure the introduction is done correctly, right? So imagine being at a dead-end job, divorced, broke, hunting squirrels for food, right? Not the ideal situation. So that's where he was at. But then he went from that to having just one conversation every 2 or 3 days with the seller. That's it. And these people are right out of the newspaper, by the way, the For Rent and Fizbo ads. One conversation every 2 or 3 days. So in the first 4 days, a seller called him back and said, "Hey, I got your email. Thanks for explaining that. I'm ready to go. I want to do a lease option. I already emailed you the signed letter of intent. What do I do next?" Now, Mark couldn't believe it, but he went to work, right? It's not that hard. Signs, ads, and your buyer's list. So he went to work, and by that weekend, he moved that house and made $3,500 from the down payment. That was his first deal. He picked up his first house in 4 days. How many investors do that? And how many of them do it just by calling people and making friends? Not, faking it till you make it. Just by making friends, being nice. And these conversations he would have while he was on his lunch break or while he was on the way, on his way home from work. And if you're doing this, be totally transparent. Tell people that you're on your lunch break or on your way home from work, Be totally honest. Now, in his first month, he did another deal. So there were 2 deals in his first month. That first one came pretty quickly, though. Then in his second month, he did 4 deals, 1 a week. Then in the third month, it was 7 deals, almost 2 a week. His total net profit on month 3 was over $20,000. Altogether, he made $30,000 in his first 90 days. Over $30,000 in his first 90 days just from calling one seller every 2 or 3 days and making friends with them. Just having a very, very friendly, open-ended, very friendly conversation. That's the power of what I'm talking about. Hitting 10 grand a month just from making friends. Anybody can do this. And that's why I'm saying this. Anybody can do this. I get these questions all the time from people that say, "Oh, Azam, I can't do this, or I can't do that, or I don't know if I can do this, or I don't have the confidence to do this." You can do this, right? You can call someone up and just be nice. I mean, think about it this way. Imagine your mother, brother, sister, sister, someone you care about, daughter, whatever, son, uncle, father, anybody that you care about, right? Think about if one of your kids, maybe they're not old enough, maybe they are. Think about if they had a house for sale and somebody called them up. What do you want? What ideas? What are the thoughts you want running through that person's mind? That person that's about to talk to the person you love and care about dearly. Do you want them thinking like a vulture? Do you want them thinking like a power negotiator? Do you want them going into that conversation thinking, oh, let me beat them up on their price and see if I can get, the best deal I can get, or how I can just reach down and like stealing candy from a baby? Do you want them having that mentality? Or do you want someone calling up saying, you know what, this person needs help. They obviously have some problem they want to solve. Let me see how I can help them. If I can make money helping them, great. If not, you know what? At least I get to help them. If nothing else, I get to make a friend. Isn't that what you want going through their head? I'll tell you guys, some of the worst stuff I ever did was the stuff I did on Wall Street. And I would have loved for somebody to have taught me this, to have shown me that there's a better way to do things. Because, in our society or whatever you want to call it today, the stuff I did on Wall Street, I met former presidents doing that. So in my mind, I was very young at the time. I thought this is the way you do it. This is how you should be. Go in there, bulldoze through the conversation. I was taught by someone, these words ring out in my mind. One of my head trainers, who's a big guy on Wall Street, he said, when you talk to someone, you only have two goals. Number one, get their money. Number two, don't go to jail. That's the attitude I was trained with. So I had to learn this stuff the hard way, the long, drawn out way. But the beauty in this situation now with you is that the decades of my working, you get to learn from that in just moments, right? This is how you turn decades into days, by learning from the mistakes of others. This isn't that difficult. One of the best things you'll do right now is just pick up the phone, call someone up, and just make a friend. Just go into that conversation. You know what? I just want to see how I could help you, if there's a way. Or if you get a little bit better with this, go through some of our dialogue algorithms and have them build a bridge to you. Something as simple as, I saw your number and I was just wondering how I could help you. How would help look to you? And have them build that bridge to you. I love you guys. I have love for you guys, and I want to make sure that you're able to go out and put things in place. Take the steps, start building a little momentum and then build on top of that. Just go into these conversations. Just ask yourself, when is the last time someone that you did business with actually cared about you? It's hard to think back to that, right? It rarely happens. It's so rare that alone makes someone stand out. So if you want to stand out from everyone else, just start caring. It doesn't matter where you're starting out, even if you're hunting for squirrels, man. And just, in general, I get questions from people that have money issues or have debt issues. And in the case of being broke or losing your income or having a mountain of debt, a lot of people react to that by cutting expenses and pinching pennies. But that only deals with the symptoms. You have to solve the root cause of the problem. And that'll only happen by increasing your income. I know what it's like to have debt lurking and stalking you. It's like a constant feeling of dread. You lay down at night and you feel like you're balancing a mountain on your chest. And it ain't gonna move on its own. You gotta do more than budget. You have to scale it and slay it and then rinse and repeat. All right, we're way past our time. We gotta wrap up. Let's do a quick recap of what we talked about. First, we went over the importance of making sure that you build your business not as one large business, but as multiple self-contained parts based on self-similarity. So each division makes you 10 to 30 grand a month. When you hire an agent, we want that relationship and that income to be self-containing units. So if we look at it, we see this. We went over how to get real estate agents to go out and just go through the basic sources to find us enough deals to make 10 grand a month, and they can make a whole bunch of money at the same time. And they can do that by going through these sources and adding consumers. Very simple and easy process. In this case, those consumers are sellers. They add those people to our compliance curve with a properly positioned introduction. We also went over the amount of time that it takes the agent, which is basically nothing, and this can be hired out to others, and the agent can do a little arbitrage where you pay them $25, $30, $50, $100, whatever, an hour, and then they turn around and pay someone $10 an hour to get it done, so they can make money just, separately from whatever else they make with you. They can make money on that part too. So it's a pretty cool process. And also, after the seller goes through the curve, one of two things will happen. Either they're ready to go or they're not ready to go. If they aren't, they're still part of the indoctrination. They still move along the curve, so they can work with you or they can send you other business. And if and when they are ready to go and they're ready to sell their house on your terms or with your pricing, then they come back over here and they either go to that agent or they go to another agent, and this completes that half, right? That is the getting of the deals, the acquiring of these assets, all zeroed down with no credit and no time invested. This is done subtractively. You don't even know about this being done. Then we move on to the second part, completing the transaction and closing. Now to do this, all you ever need are three things. Remember, signs, ads, your buyer's list. But right now we're only just talking about signs. Later on we'll add the buyer's list and then ads eventually. But right now, even with just signs, that's all you need to get this done. So we have signs up immediately, then we qualify and show the houses. We qualify the buyers and show the houses to them. The agent handles that. Then they take the buyer to the closing. The deal closes and you get a check in the mail or money wired into your Bizank account. We covered how to pay your agents so they can start stacking all kinds of G's on their own. We also went over the basics of how to build your indoctrination, including getting testimonials, the recordings, creating compliance assets, all that stuff. There's a whole lot more I can go over, but right now I just want to make sure you had enough, that you guys had more than enough to go out there and start making it happen. We also went over some great examples of students and others who are, starting from scratch, who did this from zero and started making all kinds of money, started building their businesses and building their income immediately, almost overnight. They went on to build incomes of at least $10,000 to $20,000 a month, all in less than 60 to 90 days. And there's a whole lot more we went over. You can watch this as many times as you want. You can download it and have it forever. The main thing you want to focus on is your skill. The skill of talking people into doing stuff might be like the most important skill you ever build. Like I said, because if you do that well, you never have to do anything else, And I always get emails from people who talk about how hungry they are and how badly they want to make a difference. It's why I make classes like this. So even if I don't open the doors again for new students, and even if I'm not accepting applications right now, or even if you and I never work together, or if you don't think you have the money or whatevs, you could still do this. You could put these things in place and start creating income ascension and social mobility for yourself and people around you, the people you care about. By the way, if you don't get emails from me, and I know sometimes I don't send anything for years, what's wrong with me? But that was usually when I was doing the government stuff, but I do try to send emails more regularly with cool stuff. So if you aren't getting emails from me, go to captainbad.com. I'll send you a whole bunch of classes just like today. You're going to get really cool stuff from me. There's all sorts of classes about how to get into real estate and how to get into real estate, no money down, no credit checks, is making 10 to 30 grand a month on each deal that you do, all that stuff. But it's also about getting into business and buying businesses the same way. You also get the most important comprehensive summary of all the lessons I've learned. It's in one big class called the SA class. You definitely want to check that out. And I'll tell you, if that doesn't change your life or change the way you look at things, then you have no soul. It's great stuff. I think you're really going to like it. I get great feedback from it. You're going to love it, I promise. So go to captainbad.com and get immersed in our stuff and really, just see the world through our eyes. If you love it, you can go deeper. If you don't, well, you'll come around, right? Also, the other classes that I mentioned here today, like the science class, the seller financing class, the real estate basics and leverage class, the class on compliance, all those other ones that I mentioned, you want to make sure you go through those as well. If you have problems finding them, just send me an email, let me know, and I'll make sure you get it. But for right now, just go to Captain Bad. If you're not getting emails from me, captainbad.com. I'll see you there. All right, guys, thank you so much for all the support and everything. You guys are awesome. I love you. Until next time, take care. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, guys. We'll talk.